The Unseen Artist. Introduction to the artist. Darnell Foster lived in a modest, one-bedroom apartment in a bustling neighborhood, tucked away in a corner where the vibrancy of street art and community life met the quiet hum of a world that often overlooked him. His apartment was a reflection of his journey, humble, cluttered, but full of heart. Canvases leaned against the walls, paint tubes and brushes were scattered across the table, and unfinished works filled the space. Darnell's studio was small, but it was where he could breathe, where he could escape, and where his true self came alive through each stroke of the brush. Darnell's journey into the world of art had not been easy. Growing up in a neighborhood where the odds were stacked against him, he quickly learned that creativity was his means of survival. Raised in an area where violence and poverty loomed large, art became his escape, his safe space, and his voice. His mother, a schoolteacher who worked tirelessly to make ends meet, encouraged him to explore his talents. Though his family struggled financially, they nurtured Darnell's passion for drawing and painting, seeing it as an avenue to a brighter future. However, there was no clear path for someone like Darnell. He didn't have the privilege of attending prestigious art schools or rubbing elbows with influential figures in the art world. He was self-taught, pouring hours into perfecting his craft, experimenting with styles, and learning through trial and error. His work was raw and emotional, deeply personal, and often painted from his lived experiences, reflecting themes of race, identity, and the complexity of the Black experience in America. Darnell's art explored the inner conflict of being a part of a community that was often misunderstood, marginalized, and stereotyped. Despite his dedication and raw talent, Darnell's art largely went unnoticed. He had sold a few pieces here and there, to local collectors and small exhibitions, but his work remained unknown to the broader art world. He longed for recognition, for someone to see the value in what he created beyond just the paint on the canvas. His dream was simple: to be acknowledged for the stories his art told, to make a difference through his creations, and to bring light to the beauty and struggles of his community. But as the days passed, it felt like that dream was slipping farther and farther out of reach. Introduction to the gallery owner. Jonathan Caldwell, on the other hand, was a man whose reputation in the art world was well established. A fixture in the high society art scene, Jonathan owned the prestigious Caldwell Gallery, a space known for showcasing the crème de la crème of the art world. The gallery was sleek, polished, and had walls lined with works from some of the most revered artists in history. Jonathan was the gatekeeper of the art world, his taste dictating what was considered worthy of attention and praise. He prided himself on selecting only the most refined, sophisticated pieces for his gallery, works that would appeal to his wealthy clientele, who saw art as a status symbol more than anything else. Jonathan's worldview was one of exclusivity. He believed that art should mirror the opulence of the world in which it was displayed, and that only certain artists, particularly those from established backgrounds and with elite credentials, could fit within that mold. His definition of art was narrow, confined to what was culturally accepted, palatable to the mainstream, and often disconnected from the struggles and stories of everyday people. Artists from marginalized communities, those whose works came from personal, raw experiences rather than well-rehearsed techniques, were often dismissed by Jonathan as unpolished, unworthy of the prestigious space his gallery provided. His bias against unconventional art was well known. Jonathan wasn't just a gallery owner, he was an influencer, a tastemaker who shaped the public's perception of what art was and who could create it. To him, the messy, unrefined works of artists like Darnell were an affront to his carefully curated world. Art, as far as Jonathan was concerned, was about sophistication, cultural status, and beauty, and he believed that any artist who didn't meet these lofty standards simply didn't belong. First encounter. Determined to change his fate and eager for the recognition he knew he deserved, Darnell gathered his best pieces and set out for Caldwell Gallery. He had heard of Jonathan Caldwell's reputation as one of the most influential figures in the art world, and despite the odds, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the opportunity that would change everything for him. He had been creating art for years, pouring his soul into each piece, and he was ready to show the world what he had to offer. With his portfolio in hand, Darnell made his way to the gallery, walking through its polished, marble-floored entrance with a mix of awe and anticipation. The space was everything he had imagined, bright, pristine, and filled with works of art that seemed to whisper from their frames, each one carrying the weight of centuries of acclaim and success. He walked up to the receptionist, his nerves bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Caldwell," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Moments later, Jonathan Caldwell emerged from behind a large, glossy door. Darnell stood up straighter, trying to keep his composure as he approached the gallery owner. Jonathan extended a hand with a practiced smile. "How can I help you?" "I'm Darnell Foster," Darnell began, trying to sound confident. "I'm an artist, and I'd like to show you some of my work. I believe my art could be a good fit for your gallery." Jonathan glanced at Darnell's portfolio, his sharp eyes scanning over the pieces with an air of detached indifference. He flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing as he scanned the raw, emotional pieces in front of him. There was no mistaking the disdain on his face as he closed the portfolio with a dismissive snap. "This is interesting," Jonathan said, his tone patronizing. "But it's a bit too raw, don't you think? There's no sophistication here, no refinement. This isn't quite what my gallery represents. We prefer art that is, well, more polished. More finished." Darnell's heart sank as Jonathan's words hit him like a brick. He had poured everything into these pieces, and yet, to Jonathan, they were nothing more than unrefined. He felt the sting of rejection, but worse, he felt invisible. As the gallery owner's dismissive tone echoed in his ears, Darnell's resolve solidified. This rejection wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. "Thank you for your time," Darnell said, his voice strained but steady. He took his portfolio, tucked it under his arm, and walked out of the gallery, his steps heavy with the weight of Jonathan's words. But as the door closed behind him, a fire ignited within him. He had been mocked, yes, but he wasn't going to let that be the end of his story. Jonathan Caldwell had no idea who he was dealing with. Darnell Foster was just getting started. And one day, he would show Jonathan exactly what his art was worth. In Part 1, we established Darnell's deep passion for art and introduced Jonathan Caldwell's elitist view of the art world. The encounter between the two highlights the conflict of rejection and sets the stage for Darnell's transformation from a dismissed artist to a force in the art world. Would you like me to continue building on the next part of the story? The hidden potential. The artist's quiet success. While Jonathan Caldwell remained comfortably ensconced in the world of elite galleries and high-society art buyers, Darnell Foster was quietly cultivating a reputation that would soon turn the art world on its head. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, Darnell's art had been gaining traction in underground circles, those who appreciated the raw, unapologetic nature of his work. His pieces, though dismissed by the established art world as unrefined, were speaking to a community that understood the depth of his themes, race, identity, and the complexities of the human experience. Darnell's art explored these themes in a way that had never been seen before. Each brushstroke was an exploration of history, heritage, and the ongoing struggles of Black people, but it was done in a modern, abstract style that defied convention. His works, which blended vibrant colors with abstract forms, were both unsettling and beautiful, demanding the viewer to look deeper. The boldness with which Darnell addressed issues like systemic oppression, identity, and the Black experience in America resonated deeply with those who felt alienated by mainstream art. His initial sales were small, but they were growing. A few pieces found their way into the hands of private collectors who were not only moved by the message behind Darnell's work, but also saw the potential for its value to increase exponentially. These early collectors, many of whom were influencers, independent curators, or art critics from more progressive circles, recognized something in Darnell's work that no one in the traditional art world had acknowledged. His style was unique, his message profound, and his potential undeniable. Darnell's following was small but dedicated. Word spread within certain communities, both local and international, that Darnell was an artist to watch. Social media, art blogs, and niche galleries began to feature his work, building a buzz that had no place in Jonathan Caldwell's exclusive, high-end space. His work started to command higher prices, far above what he had ever expected, as collectors began to recognize that Darnell's art was something truly groundbreaking. It was clear that he wasn't just another painter trying to fit into the status quo, he was an artist reshaping the narrative of what art could be. Despite this quiet success, Darnell remained humble and focused on his craft. He continued to work from his cramped studio, often late into the night, driven by a passion to create art that reflected the world around him. The growing recognition was gratifying, but it never distracted him from his ultimate goal, to create pieces that would challenge the world and reflect his lived experiences. Darnell knew that he had found something special, something that was not about seeking approval from the gatekeepers of the art world, but about telling his truth. The breaking point. Darnell's breakthrough came unexpectedly, when a prestigious auction house in New York, known for handling works by emerging artists, purchased one of his pieces for a significant sum. The piece, The Weight of History, a striking painting that combined bold brushstrokes with powerful symbolism representing the struggles of his community, was a standout at the auction. The bidding war was intense, and in the end, the painting sold for an amount far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The sale immediately made waves within the art world. Art collectors, critics, and dealers began to take notice of this new, fresh voice in the art scene. Suddenly, Darnell Foster was being mentioned in the same breath as some of the most revered contemporary artists, and the value of his work skyrocketed. The sale not only placed him in the limelight but also catapulted his reputation as an artist to watch. Darnell's work was now viewed as valuable, innovative, and, most importantly, ahead of its time. It was clear that he was creating art that had a lasting impact, and his voice was one that could not be ignored. Despite the attention and acclaim, Darnell remained focused on his work. He wasn't swayed by the media frenzy or the growing interest in his name. Instead, he poured even more of himself into his art. He began working on new pieces that explored even deeper themes of identity, social justice, and history. Each painting, each brushstroke, became more personal, more authentic. It wasn't about the money, it was about the message. The financial success of his auction piece gave Darnell the freedom to work on his own terms. He could now create without worrying about commercial pressures, knowing that his art was being embraced by those who truly understood it. But for Darnell, the true victory wasn't the price tags attached to his paintings, it was the impact his art was having on the world around him. Gallery owner's dismissal continues. Meanwhile, Jonathan Caldwell remained oblivious to the growing demand for Darnell's work. From his comfortable, privileged perch in the art world, Jonathan could not fathom why a work like The Weight of History would generate such excitement. To him, it was just another overhyped piece by a new artist whose work didn't conform to his traditional standards. The buzz surrounding Darnell only served to further fuel Jonathan's dismissive attitude. After all, he had rejected Darnell's portfolio months ago, and now, as far as he was concerned, Darnell's rise was nothing more than a passing trend. In private, Jonathan mocked Darnell's success. He scoffed at the idea that an artist like him could ever sustain such hype. "It's just a fad," Jonathan said during a conversation with a fellow gallery owner. "A few trendy collectors buying into the hype of a black artist. They'll tire of him soon enough. His work is raw, unpolished. It doesn't have staying power." Jonathan's words were dismissive, and they reflected his deep-rooted biases. He couldn't see the depth and brilliance in Darnell's work, because it didn't fit into the mold of what Jonathan considered real art. He believed that only artists who conformed to traditional norms of aesthetics and technique were worthy of being represented in his gallery. To Jonathan, Darnell was just another unknown artist trying to get attention, and the idea that he might be more than that was inconceivable. Little did Jonathan know, Darnell had overheard some of these conversations. The gallery owner's words stung, but they also served as a reminder of why he had to keep pushing forward. Darnell knew that his art was not for Jonathan or the elite circles of the art world. His art was for the people, those who saw the struggle, the story, and the beauty in his work. This only fueled Darnell's determination to prove Jonathan wrong. He had already achieved so much on his own, without the support or validation of the art establishment. But he knew that, someday, Jonathan would realize just how wrong he had been. And when that day came, Darnell would be ready to show him just how far his art had taken him. In Part 2, Darnell's quiet rise continues as he gains recognition and success in the art world's underground circles. His breakthrough moment at the auction house establishes his growing reputation, while Jonathan remains unaware of the artist's true potential. This sets the stage for a powerful confrontation, where Darnell's journey of redemption and proving his worth will take center stage. Would you like to continue to the next part of the story? Climbing the ladder. Darnell Foster's name was no longer just a whisper in underground circles, it was now a powerful, unmistakable force in the art world. His breakthrough piece, The Weight of History, had been just the beginning. As his works continued to capture the essence of his identity and the struggles of his community, they resonated with a much broader audience. What was once a small, intimate following had now expanded into an international network of collectors, art critics, and cultural influencers. The price of his paintings soared, with major auction houses now fighting to secure his work. Darnell's pieces were sold at auction for millions, an astounding feat for any artist, let alone one who had only just begun to step into the limelight. Each piece that went up for bid seemed to set a new record, and art collectors raced to acquire his work, knowing they were purchasing not only a valuable asset but a piece of history. Galleries that had once ignored or rejected Darnell's art now lined up at his door. They saw the unique blend of contemporary techniques and deeply poignant, often controversial subject matter that he brought to the canvas. His work was visually captivating, blending bright, bold colors with intricate textures and layers. But what truly set Darnell apart was the message behind it. His art wasn't just about beauty, it was about truth, about confronting the painful history of race and identity in America, and about giving voice to the marginalized. His pieces spoke to the experiences of Black people, the fight for justice, and the unrelenting spirit of resilience. Darnell's work became synonymous with cultural transformation. Art critics hailed him as one of the most important voices of his generation, someone who was not only pushing the boundaries of art but also reshaping the conversations around race, history, and identity. Galleries around the world were now clamoring to exhibit his pieces, and his work appeared in major international exhibitions. Each show brought more acclaim, more sales, and more attention to Darnell, making him a sought-after figure in the art world. His rise was not just about fame or financial success, it was about creating a space for artists from marginalized communities to thrive. Darnell had become a symbol of perseverance, proving that anyone could achieve greatness regardless of their background or the obstacles they faced. He was breaking through barriers, and his art was the vehicle that would carry him, and others, to new heights. Gallery owners awakening. Back at Caldwell Gallery, Jonathan Caldwell was beginning to feel the weight of his earlier dismissal of Darnell's talent. The buzz surrounding the artist's meteoric rise had not escaped Jonathan's attention. As the prices of Darnell's paintings skyrocketed at auction, Jonathan realized that he had missed out on something truly remarkable. His decision to reject Darnell's portfolio seemed more and more like a grave error in judgment. At first, Jonathan tried to downplay the significance of Darnell's success. He dismissed the growing interest in the artist's work as a fleeting trend, something that would fade as quickly as it had arrived. But the truth was undeniable. Darnell's pieces were in high demand, and major galleries were now securing exclusive deals with him. Jonathan watched in frustration as his competitors profited from the artist's work, turning Darnell into one of the most coveted figures in contemporary art. Jonathan's envy and regret grew with each passing day. He began to hear more and more about the tremendous success of Darnell's exhibitions and the millions of dollars his pieces were fetching. He had had the chance to represent Darnell when his career was still in its infancy, but he had turned him away. Now, Jonathan was relegated to the sidelines, watching as Darnell's success far exceeded his own expectations. The young artist had become a major force in the art world, and Jonathan was no longer in control of his destiny. Panic set in as Jonathan realized that the opportunity to work with Darnell had slipped through his fingers. He began to wonder if the artist would ever consider working with him again, or if his reputation had been forever damaged by his earlier dismissal. The gallery owner's frustration grew as he saw Darnell's influence continue to expand, while his own gallery struggled to maintain its former prestige. The shifting tides of the art world had left him behind, and he knew it was only a matter of time before Darnell's success would become undeniable to everyone. The artist's new identity. Darnell, now a well-established name in the art world, had more than just financial success at his fingertips. He had the power to shape the direction of his own career. Gone were the days when he had to rely on others to validate his work. Darnell had gained enough recognition and respect that he no longer needed to fit into the traditional structures of the art world. He was now in control of his own destiny. He began to negotiate his own exhibitions and deals, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of the art world, including gallery owners like Jonathan. Darnell knew that he could no longer allow others to dictate how his art was presented or valued. Instead of relying on high-end galleries to represent him, he took the reins of his career and started curating his own exhibitions. His shows became statements in and of themselves, powerful, unapologetic, and bold. As his wealth grew, so did his vision. Darnell didn't just want to be known as an artist, he wanted to create lasting change within the art community. He used his platform to support and uplift other artists from marginalized communities, many of whom struggled to gain recognition in the same way he had. Darnell established mentorship programs to help young artists find their voices and navigate the often intimidating art world. He created spaces for collaboration and creativity, where emerging artists could thrive without the constant pressure of conforming to the industry's standards. Darnell's success was now about more than just fame or money, it was about reshaping the narrative. He wanted to show that success in the art world didn't have to follow a prescribed path. He didn't have to come from privilege, attend an elite art school, or cater to the tastes of the established art world. Darnell proved that anyone, regardless of their background, could succeed if given the chance. His rise was symbolic of a larger shift in the art world. The traditional power structures, which had long kept marginalized voices on the periphery, were being dismantled. And Darnell, once rejected by the very gatekeepers of the industry, was now standing at the forefront of that transformation. The world had underestimated Darnell Foster. But now, the world was watching as he proved them all wrong. In Part 3, Darnell's rise to fame becomes a powerful testament to his talent, perseverance, and the transformative power of art. As he begins to take control of his career, he reshapes not only his own future but also the landscape of the art world. Jonathan's realization of his mistake and Darnell's refusal to conform set the stage for an even bigger clash, as the artist becomes a symbol of change and empowerment. Would you like to move on to the next part of the story? Revenge and redemption. The artist's strategy. Now firmly entrenched in the art world and financially independent, Darnell Foster had gained far more than just fame and wealth. He had earned influence, the kind of power that allowed him to reshape not just his career but also the entire art industry. With his reputation as an artist who defied the norms and brought new voices to the forefront, Darnell had become a force that couldn't be ignored. Yet, as he stood at the peak of his success, there was one more thing Darnell knew he had to do. Jonathan Caldwell's gallery had rejected him, dismissed his talent, and belittled the very identity that Darnell's art so proudly represented. To Darnell, taking control of Caldwell Gallery was not only a strategic move, it was poetic justice. He knew that by owning the gallery, he could transform it into something truly revolutionary, a space where artists from marginalized communities could thrive, and a place where inclusivity and diverse voices were celebrated. Using his newfound wealth and network of collectors and investors, Darnell began to quietly buy shares in Caldwell Gallery. He knew it would be a slow, methodical process, one that would not attract attention too quickly, but he was patient. His network of wealthy buyers, art lovers, and influential people in the industry, many of whom had supported his work, were eager to back him in this venture. As Darnell's stake in the gallery grew, he took care to restructure its approach. No longer would it be a bastion of exclusivity, showcasing only artists who fit a traditional mold. Instead, Darnell ensured that the gallery began to embrace a more inclusive and diverse approach. His influence shaped its exhibitions, making room for artists who were once overlooked or disregarded. The gallery that Jonathan Caldwell had once built as a reflection of his own elitist tastes was now shifting to reflect the broader, more varied art world, one that Darnell had helped create. But it wasn't just about changing the exhibitions, it was about taking control. As the gallery's financial struggles deepened, Darnell's influence over the operations grew. The market was changing, and the gallery's inability to adapt only added to its decline. Darnell, meanwhile, was thriving. His influence in the art world was now undeniable, and every step he took in building his career only increased his control over Caldwell Gallery. Darnell was on the verge of having a majority stake in the gallery, and he knew that once he did, the future of the art space would no longer be in Jonathan's hands. The game was about to change, and Darnell was the one in control. The gallery owner's downfall. Meanwhile, Jonathan Caldwell's world was unraveling. The art world had shifted, and his gallery was no longer the powerhouse it once had been. The younger, more dynamic artists and galleries were beginning to take center stage. Artists like Darnell, who pushed boundaries and embraced diversity, were now in demand, while Jonathan's preference for traditional, safe art was no longer enough to keep his gallery relevant. Jonathan's refusal to adapt to the changing tastes of the art world had put him at a disadvantage. He was unable to recognize emerging talent or understand the cultural shifts that were happening within the industry. The rising popularity of new voices, many of them challenging the status quo, left Caldwell Gallery behind. Where Jonathan had once prided himself on being a tastemaker, he now found himself struggling to stay afloat, unable to capture the attention of the next generation of art collectors or patrons. Meanwhile, Darnell continued to soar. His name was being mentioned alongside some of the greatest artists in history, and his works were being sought after by collectors who recognized their cultural significance and artistic innovation. With every new exhibition, Darnell expanded his influence, securing high-profile deals, media coverage, and accolades that left Jonathan in the dust. The financial success of Darnell's work was unparalleled, and Jonathan watched helplessly as his own gallery's profits plummeted. The gallery owner's frustration grew with each passing day as he realized he was losing control of the very institution he had built. The world was changing, and Jonathan had failed to change with it. His refusal to embrace artists like Darnell had cost him everything. The thought of Darnell, once the dismissed outsider, now dominating the art world, and his own gallery, was a bitter pill to swallow. Panic set in as Jonathan realized that the future of the gallery was no longer in his hands. He had allowed his pride, his biases, and his refusal to adapt to the new landscape to bring him to this point. And now, Darnell was poised to take it all. The final confrontation. The day came when Darnell, with a majority stake in Caldwell Gallery, stood at the helm of the institution that Jonathan had once considered his own. The changes Darnell had implemented were now in full swing, and the gallery had become a vibrant, inclusive space for new artists and bold ideas. But Jonathan, who had once been at the center of it all, was now sidelined, his influence slipping away. Darnell knew it was time for the final confrontation, the moment when he would face Jonathan and show him just how much the world had changed. He invited Jonathan to a meeting at the gallery, a place that had once been Jonathan's domain but now felt completely different. When Jonathan arrived, he was greeted by Darnell, who stood confidently at the center of the gallery, a stark contrast to the nervous, self-doubting artist who had once walked through these doors seeking validation. Jonathan could see the shift in Darnell. He was no longer the hungry artist searching for approval, he was the leader now, and the gallery was his vision. "I know you've been wondering why I've called this meeting," Darnell began, his voice calm but firm. "Well, Jonathan, it's because I'm the one in charge now. I'm the one who owns this gallery." Jonathan's face paled. He had seen the signs, but hearing it from Darnell's mouth was a blow he hadn't been prepared for. "What are you talking about?" Jonathan stammered, his usual air of confidence gone. "I built this gallery. This is my place. You can't just take it from me." Darnell shook his head. "I didn't take it from you, Jonathan. You gave it away when you refused to see the value in what I was doing. You mocked me, dismissed me, and now look where we are. I'm in control, and I'm going to reshape this gallery into something that reflects the true diversity of the art world." Jonathan's face turned red with anger, but he could not deny the truth of Darnell's words. He had missed the opportunity to represent Darnell when it mattered, and now the tables had turned. Darnell's success was undeniable, and Jonathan was no longer relevant in the same way. Darnell paused for a moment, then continued. "I'm offering you a position within the new structure, Jonathan. You can stay, but you'll no longer be the one calling the shots. The future of this gallery belongs to artists who understand the world we live in, not those who want to keep it locked in the past." Jonathan, humbled and defeated, knew there was nothing left to say. The opportunity for redemption had come, but the terms were not in his favor. He had been outpaced by a new generation of artists and thinkers who had left him behind. With a sense of finality, Darnell turned and walked away from Jonathan, knowing that his success had never been about revenge. It had always been about changing the art world, giving others the chance he had been denied, and creating a space for voices that had been ignored for too long. And as Darnell moved forward, the legacy of Caldwell Gallery would be his, shaped by his vision, his values, and the transformation he had set in motion. In Part 4, Darnell's strategic rise to power within Caldwell Gallery culminates in a poetic moment of revenge and redemption. The transformation of the gallery is symbolic of Darnell's broader impact on the art world, while the final confrontation between him and Jonathan marks a powerful turning point. Would you like to move on to the final part of the story? Legacy and transformation. A new era for the gallery. Under Darnell Foster's leadership, Caldwell Gallery became a symbol of transformation within the art world. The once exclusive space, reserved for the elite and established artists, was now an inclusive, dynamic environment where emerging talent from underrepresented communities could shine. Darnell had taken the gallery's reputation, once a fortress of traditional tastes, and turned it into a thriving hub for progressive and diverse artistic voices. The gallery was no longer just about art for the wealthy, it was about art that spoke to the people, reflected their experiences, and championed those who had long been ignored. Darnell's vision was clear: the art world could and should be a space for all voices, not just the privileged few. He used his platform to launch initiatives that provided young artists from marginalized communities with the opportunities that had once been denied to him. He developed mentorship programs, offering guidance and support to those who were just starting their careers, helping them navigate the complexities of the art industry. Darnell knew firsthand the struggles of breaking into the art world without the right connections or resources, so he made it his mission to level the playing field for the next generation of creators. As the gallery's profile grew, so did its influence. Major exhibitions featured artists whose work challenged societal norms, provoked thought, and sparked important conversations about race, identity, and culture. The gallery became known not just for the art it displayed, but for the values it upheld, values of inclusion, empowerment, and a dedication to social justice. It became an institution that was no longer about art for art's sake, but art for change. The art world began to shift in response. Darnell's work and his leadership had shown the world that art could be a vehicle for transformation, and as Caldwell Gallery continued to thrive under his direction, it helped to shape the future of art in a profound way. Darnell was no longer just a successful artist, he had become a cultural leader, one who used his success to push boundaries and elevate voices that had been silenced for far too long. Reflection on the journey. One evening, as Darnell sat in his office at the Caldwell Gallery, now a vibrant, bustling space filled with works from emerging artists, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The gallery walls were lined with pieces that told stories of struggle, triumph, and resilience. His own art was still a part of the collection, but now it was interspersed with works from artists who had come after him, who were inspired by the path he had carved. Darnell thought back to the early days when he had struggled to make ends meet, when he had been dismissed by Jonathan Caldwell as unworthy of a place in the art world. He remembered the rejection, the humiliation, and the constant battle to prove his worth. Those days had shaped him, but they no longer defined him. His journey from struggling artist to gallery owner was a testament to the power of resilience and self-belief. But Darnell knew that his success wasn't just about personal achievement. it had never been. It had always been about creating a space for others, about ensuring that future generations of artists wouldn't have to face the same barriers he had encountered. His journey had been difficult, but it had allowed him to build something lasting, something that would outlive him and continue to impact the art world long after his own time. Darnell understood now that his work had never been just about creating beautiful paintings. It had always been about creating change, about challenging the status quo, and about shifting the narrative in the art world. He had fought not just for his own place at the table, but for the opportunity for others to sit there with him. And in doing so, he had helped to redefine what art could be and who could create it. Darnell's lasting impact. Darnell Foster's legacy was not defined by the millions of dollars his paintings fetched or the accolades he received. It was defined by the doors he opened for others, the spaces he created for new voices, and the impact he had on the art world as a whole. His journey had proven that success was not reserved for those with privilege, connections, or access to elite art circles. Success, he showed, was for those who dared to believe in themselves, who fought for their vision, and who refused to be silenced. The artists who had once been overlooked now had a platform to showcase their work. The gallery Darnell had transformed was a beacon of opportunity for the next generation of creatives. And as his mentorship programs flourished, countless young artists were now following in his footsteps, not only creating art but shaping the future of the industry. Darnell's story had become a roadmap for those who had been told they didn't belong, showing them that the art world could be a place of inclusion, of cultural dialogue, and of creative freedom. Darnell's impact extended far beyond the walls of the Caldwell Gallery. His influence reached into every corner of the art world, from the way artists negotiated their value to the way galleries showcased work. The changes he had made, both in the industry and in the hearts and minds of those who saw his work, were lasting. The art world had been irrevocably transformed by his presence, by his fight, and by his vision. He had proven that the art world, like society itself, could be reshaped when people challenged the status quo and fought for what they believed in. And as Darnell looked around the gallery, watching a new generation of artists showcase their work, he knew that the world he had helped build was more than just a reflection of his success. It was a testament to the power of art to change lives, to challenge systems, and to tell stories that had long been left untold. Darnell Foster's legacy would live on, not in the art he had created, but in the world he had helped to transform.